Serious, what is something scary that has happened to you, that you cannot explain rationally? I dreamt I was being choked and woke up to find my own hands around my throat. There was a small door that led to attic space in my bedroom, 11 years old to 13, and it became habit that I would shut the door as I walked into my bedroom a couple times a week. I didn't think anything of it, just assumed my mom didn't close it all the way when she left it. After a while I made the mistake of joking with her when she made a comment about me not picking up after myself. I said something like, "Every night I have to close the attic door behind you, how about you shut it all the way when you're done?" She then informed me that she hasn't been in the attic in months. Asked my brother, nope. Asked my father, nope. So then I started to pay really close attention to it. Making sure it was closed in the morning, checking it after school, checking blaster dinner. Then head up to bed and, open. After a couple months of wondering, studying, experimenting, I thought I'd see what happens if I just don't shut it. Opened the door before school and checked it after school, still open. Checked it after dinner, still open. Before bed, still open. Now I'm laying in bed, mind going crazy with the open door across the room. Decide to check it out, so I roll over and focus on the black space into the attic to see a face staring back at me. Bolt downstairs, wake parents, get ridiculed by brother, switch bedrooms with brother, move into new house about 6 months later, due to expanding household. New physics teacher and his wife bought our house. I could have forgotten all about that event and chalked it up to me having an overactive mind. But then my senior year I discovered how awesome our physics teacher was. Became my favorite class and by far, my favorite teacher. End of senior year my friend and I took our VHS camcorder around town, doing mostly silly things, but then took it to my old house to see what they've done with the place. We got a very fun tour. I got to tell stories about all the projects my dad did that were still part of the house. Then the wife leads us upstairs to show us the sewing room. I ask, jokingly, "Notice anything strange in this room?" And her face goes blank. On camera, she asks what I mean and I try to shrug it off but end up saying something about the attic door. She confirmed that every time she comes up to sew, the attic door is open. She then tells us that the second day of being in the house, their dog, German Shepherd, had gone into the room but would not go back downstairs. He started barking and could not be consoled, and then jumped through the window, landing on the tin roof over the porch and then running off. The dog did not come back until the next day and has not stepped foot into the hallway that leads upstairs since. I had the initial thought that I could show my parents and brother the story I had on film, but I decided to just let it be.
When I was in university I lived by myself. It was a nice little studio unit behind a house in a fairly decent area. I would honestly think nothing of walking places at night. There was a 24-hour McDonald's and a 7-Eleven that I would walk to, often between 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. since I was a massive night owl. Well, one day after finishing an essay at about 2 in the morning I decided I was hungry, but didn't really have anything easy to cook, so I decided to walk down to the 7-Eleven and grab a pie or something. However, as soon as I opened my door I was overcome by a suffocating feeling of fear. My heart started pounding, I started shaking, the works. Telling myself that this was ridiculous, I walked out to the street with the intent to still go, but that was as far as I got. I was terrified for no reason that I could understand, but no less intensely despite that. I ran back inside and ate dry cereal. Later the next day, I heard about a group of drunk guys that were causing havoc down near the intersection at the 7-Eleven. They'd beaten up someone from my university. Even though I can't explain it, I'm convinced something bad would have happened to me that night, if I had ignored that feeling and gone anyway.
I'm a little late, but screw it. I was in first grade, hanging out at recess with a friend. He was shooting some hoops outside and I was playing DS, sitting on the pavement. I remember him asking me if he could make a shot from halfway across the court. I told him he could try, but he probably wouldn't make it. While looking at my DS, suddenly, my dad asks me what I mean, and when I look up I'm sitting on my living room carpet, talking to my dad, and it's dark out. I was sitting in the same position, playing the same game, same level, and same exact spot in the level. Everything continued normally that night, and I didn't tell anyone at the time, but looking back it is really freaky. I thought it was a dream for the longest time, but thinking about it, it didn't really feel like a dream, and I don't really remember dreams that well.
I posted this a long time ago, but when I was younger my mom was dating this guy, who we will call JB, and after a few months he invited my mom, me, and my brother to go with him and his son, about my age, out to his lake house for the weekend. It was right on Lake Michigan but up in a more secluded area, which was pretty awesome. Well, we got up there and for one I already felt really creeped out. It was a smaller 2, maybe 3 if you count the really big attic-story house that had the living room/dining room/kitchen on the first floor and had 2 bedrooms on the second floor. His grandfather had helped to build the place with the grandfather's dad, and then he lived there for most of his life working as a tailor in the nearby town. We went up to the attic to get some beach toys, because that's where JB kept all of that stuff so he didn't have to haul it every time he went out there. Well, when we went up to the attic, I noticed in the corner covered in some dust and cobwebs about 8 mannequins, some just upper torsos and some full body. Not out of the ordinary considering a tailor had lived there. Me and JB's son slept down in the living room on the couch since there were no more beds, and near midnightish I heard one of the stairs squeak a few times. Figuring it was my mom coming to check to make sure we were asleep, I told his son to be quiet and quickly turned the TV off and hid under the covers. After not hearing any noise for a few minutes, I looked out from under the covers and saw 3 of the mannequins moving around in the kitchen. Like their body parts weren't moving, but they were sliding around the kitchen. I swore I was dreaming, but was so terribly frightened I hid back under the covers with a small yelp, and then heard the dragging on the floor coming closer and peeked out, seeing one of them just a few feet from the couch. I hid back under the covers and shut my eyes tight, hoping it would go away. The next morning I got up and tried not to think about it, really hoping it was just a bad dream, but when we went back up to the attic to put the beach stuff back, the mannequins were in different spots and weren't covered in cobwebs anymore. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but it happened and I've been scared crapless of mannequins ever since.
When I was 6 years old, I had a cat named Buster. Buster was actually my stepdad's cat, but because I never had a cat before, I claimed him as my own. Suffice it to say, Buster didn't like being hugged and coddled all the time by a little child, so he hated me. He avoided me at all costs. He was also an outdoor cat, so he would often spend most days outside and then come in for the night. One night, Buster didn't come back in the house. We usually fed him at night, so I was worried. Our area was also well known for an abundance of coyotes. My parents were being a bit hush-hush about Buster's disappearance, but I didn't get the hint. That night, when I was drifting off to sleep, Buster jumped onto my bed. He lay down by my head and let me pet him until I fell asleep. Honestly, I was shocked because he had never done this before. The next morning, I triumphantly walked downstairs and related to my parents that Buster now loved me, because he slept in my bed during the night. My parents looked at me inquisitively and sat me down at the breakfast table to let me know that, while they were outside the night before, they had found Buster's body in the alley behind our house. They thought he had been harassed by a coyote. But he was dead, so he couldn't have slept in my bed that night. To this day, I like to think that Buster just wanted to say goodbye and thank me for trying to love him in the only way a child knew how.
Pretty sure I lived in a haunted house for a while. Strange things. For one, I always felt like I was being watched in my room, and if I had the door open to the hallway I would swear I'd see someone walk by out of the corner of my eye. We had 2 cats, and someone's they'd be in my room sleeping and then all of a sudden they would sit bolt up and stare at the door, and nothing I did could move them for a long time. This happened often. One day in my bathroom, the shelf that had my sister's beauty stuff randomly lose hold of all of the items. The thing was, the shelf wasn't loose or hanging and all the stuff had to bounce out of a 2-inch high lip into the sink. One time in the middle of the night, my sister's 100-plus-year-old dresser she got as a gift from our grandma just fell over. This thing weighed a ton and it was built like a tank. Sister said she heard the sound of someone pushing. Mom and sister used to yell at me for sneaking around the house, only I wasn't home or I was in my room. They said they saw a man in shadows that was about my height. One day we also ran into the old owner and my mom casually asked the lady if she had ever experienced anything in the house. The lady started crying and said no one believed her, but yes, she experienced a lot of stuff. I moved out around that time. I do not miss that place.
I used to work doing maintenance at historic properties. There was a historic house museum I worked at when it wasn't open to the public. It was part of a whole landmark site. There was a visitor's center with offices, and then the house was about half a mile up a dirt road in a wooded area. Sometimes I worked with a crew, but there were a lot of times I was there alone. One winter day, when it was really cloudy and dark, I was working alone to get ready to replace some electric work on the exterior of the house. I went inside and turned off the circuit to the whole property, and I tested it. It was off. I locked the doors and went outside to work. After about an hour, I got down from my ladder and started walking around the house, and then one of the lights inside the house turned on. I started to freak out, but thought that maybe someone was playing a joke on me. I called the visitors center on my walkie-talkie, and confirmed that the only other person who was working that day was still there and hadn't left, and that all the keys to the house were present and accounted for. That's when I freaked out and ran the half-mile up to the office. I made my coworker come back with me to check out what was going on, but when we got to the house, the light was off again, but the bulb was still warm. All the doors were still locked and the circuit was still off. Still gives me shivers to this day.
I was home alone for a weekend a few years ago while I was still in high school. After school one day I was driving home, and when I passed in front of my house I thought I saw some old lady in white clothes in my sister's room looking through the window. I thought it was stupid, so I went in the room to check out what it actually was, but I couldn't find anything. I pretty much forgot about it until later that night I got a call from a very panicked and scared neighbor saying there was some old lady pacing back and forth in my sister's room. I still have no idea what it was, and I've never seen anything like it since.